The general who didn't understand the war, the one with defeat attached to his name, and even the one the Brady Bunch made fun of. These generals were not up to snuff. George B. McClellan was a smart guy. In fact, he was appointed to West Point at age 15 because he couldn't wait to get started there. That was about the only thing he never delayed. He had a massive ego to go along with his perceived self-worth, which isn't a great combination. McClellan talked himself up as the country's savior while dissing everyone around and above him. Not a great strategy for advancement. In 1861, after victory at the Battle of Rich Mountain, Lincoln made McClellan a major general. And even though Union troops lost at the Battle of Bull Run, McClellan was given command of the entire Army of the Potomac. The press called him Napoleon because of his early victories, but pretty soon everything he touched turned into Waterloo. McClellan always thought he was a hero and made sure everyone knew it. Like many insecure men in power, he was free with his criticism of others, including President Lincoln, whom he called the gorilla.
Whether it's loss of nerve or paranoia or what have you, he always believed that Lincoln's administration was not providing him with the tools he needed.
And Father Abraham, author Richard Striner, describes McClellan as weak to the point of timidity. And to prove the point, during the 1862 Peninsula Campaign, McClellan delayed until Robert E. Lee's relentless attacks forced him to abandon the mission to take Richmond. Next, McClellan decided to stay put after the Battle of Antietam, disobeying Lincoln's orders to relocate the army, not once, but twice. Finally, in November 1862, McClellan was removed from his command on the orders of the president before he could do any more damage to the Union cause. You probably know that he ran against Lincoln in the 1864 presidential election and got it handed to him. But what you probably didn't know is that he was still a U.S. Army general when he ran. He only resigned his commission on Election Day. I guess you could say he delayed that too.
Old soldiers never die. They just fade away.
There aren't too many people in history to have a plot twist like MacArthur. General Douglas MacArthur was one of the United States' most decorated officers, and some say deservedly so. He was long remembered as this great leader who always stuck it to the enemy, but then a bit of deep diving into the small details revealed a different person. You see, his poor decision-making and enormous ego overshadowed his accomplishments. For example, he tear-gassed World War I veterans in 1932, right in Washington, D.C. Then there was his failure to relocate American planes in the Philippines after the Pearl Harbor attack, leaving them an easy target for Japanese bombers.
MacArthur had ample time to get ready, even to strike counterblows.
Instead, his Air Force was virtually wiped out within minutes.
I think if it were anyone else but MacArthur that this disaster happened to, they might have been promptly relieved.
MacArthur also committed the grave sin of leaving his men behind to suffer and die at Bataan and Corregidor during World War II. He escaped to Australia, apparently under orders from President Roosevelt to save himself. His troops, who were starving and low on ammunition, were forced to surrender to the Japanese. Those who didn't die in the Bataan Death March spent 3 years in terrible conditions at Japanese prison camps. MacArthur also planned to invade the Pacific island of Mindanao, but after thousands of U.S. Marines died trying to capture a vital runway at nearby Peleliu, MacArthur changed his mind. More than 7,000 men died for nothing as a result. Things got worse during the 1950 Korean War. After capturing Seoul, MacArthur decided to press on to the border with China, ignoring intelligence that warned that 300,000 troops were lying in wait. The result was a crushing withdrawal.
An increasingly exasperated Truman heard him proposing a blockade of China and the use of nationalist Chinese troops in Korea.
Finally, when a furious MacArthur called for atomic bombs to be used against the Chinese, President Truman removed him from duty. Truman told Merle Miller, "I fired him because he wouldn't respect the authority of the president." That's the answer to that. I didn't fire him because he was a dumb son of a although he was, but that's not against the laws for generals. John J. Pershing was only the second man to be granted the title General of the Armies, and he had a reputation as a fine military leader. He also had an awesome nickname, Black Jack. The problem was he busted a lot more than he should have. He arrived in France in 1917, where he was informed that not only were the Americans short on guns, but his beloved bayonet was obsolete in modern warfare. Pershing refused to believe it. This means exactly what it sounds like. He wanted to bring a knife to a gunfight.
Over the summer of 1917, the Allies became increasingly concerned that Pershing was not prepared for the war in Europe.
Despite losing thousands of men in clashes at Belleau Wood and Soissons, Pershing continued to send his men out on a slow walk toward the enemy, making them sitting ducks. But Pershing's stubborn refusal to change tactics wasn't the only black mark against him. In Betrayal at Little Gibraltar, William Walker recounts how Pershing actively encouraged competition between major generals, George Cameron and Robert Lee Bullard. Their rivalry would have lethal consequences for the men of the 79th Division, who were pinned down by the Germans at the village of Montfaucon. After the war ended, Pershing was questioned by the House of Representatives Committee on Military Affairs. During the hearing, Congressman Alvin T. Fuller said, "I would like to ask General Pershing if American troops were ordered over the top on the other side on the morning of the day when, under the terms of the armistice, firing was to cease." Yes, he did, but Pershing claimed he was just following orders and that he didn't know what time hostilities were supposed to end. So he continued fighting, or rather he continued sending his men into battle to be wounded or killed despite the fact that the war was basically over. Proof that there is a massive difference between looking good in the fit and being fit for the job comes in the form of General William Childs Westmoreland. This guy was a World War II and Korean War vet and commanded U.S. forces in Vietnam between 1964 and 1968, but that doesn't mean he was good at it. Westmoreland's approach to the complexities of the Vietnam War was to keep throwing more firepower and more men at the enemy in the hopes of winning. In Louis Sorley's book, Westmoreland, the General Who Lost Vietnam, several senior officers are quoted as saying the general never understood the war. Whether he did or not, his bloody strategy didn't pay off. If that wasn't bad enough, Westmoreland wasn't 100% behind the official program for the pacification and long-term development of Vietnam, leaving the South Vietnamese poorly armed and unsupported for too long. And perhaps even worse, when intelligence warned about vast enemy numbers massing for what would become the 1968 Tet Offensive, Westmoreland, among others, ignored it, with catastrophic results.
They say we're fighting for something, I don't know.
Following the disaster at Tet, and with domestic support for the Vietnam War plummeting, Westmoreland did the unthinkable. He misled President Johnson about his success on the battlefield and requested over 200,000 additional troops. Johnson refused, and Westmoreland was swiftly replaced, likely saving tens of thousands of additional lives. Weeks after the 9/11 attacks, Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda became the targets of the Bush administration's war on terror. That December, during the Battle of Tora Bora in Afghanistan, the CIA were certain they had bin Laden in their sights and pleaded for Army Ranger support, but their request was denied by General Tommy Franks. This allowed bin Laden to escape to Pakistan. A few months later, Franks again refused to send in troops during Operation Anaconda, also in Afghanistan, where al-Qaeda and Taliban fighters were cornered. Like bin Laden, the Taliban were able to escape to Pakistan, but according to Franks, the result of the operation was also outstanding. In 2003, General Franks led the invasion of Iraq. One big problem: what he called his basic grand strategy was all about starting the conflict, but there were no plans for how to end it, establish stability in the region, and eventually hand over control to Iraqi authorities. Perhaps that's why a troop withdrawal that was supposed to happen in 2003 didn't take place until December 2011. By then, Franks was long retired, giving interviews about his own outstanding leadership. There's two ways to go down in history as a general: the good way and the having your name attached to the word defeat way. Wait till you get a load of this guy. Arthur St. Clair had already seen active service in the French and Indian War when he decided to buy land and settle in Pennsylvania. He eventually became a colonel in the Continental Army, and in 1777, shortly after being promoted to brigadier general, St. Clair's strategic advice helped Washington protect Princeton from the British. St. Clair was rewarded with the command of Fort Ticonderoga, but pretty soon his inexperience betrayed him. He posted his men inside the fort, which left it vulnerable to British cannons. Sure enough, the fort was lost and St. Clair was court-martialed. Somehow, he wasn't kicked out of the military. Instead, he was made governor of the Northwest Territory and negotiated the Treaty of Fort Harmar, which acquired basically everything north of the Ohio River. In 1791, St. Clair led around 2,000 demoralized, poorly armed troops against the remaining Native American tribes that either didn't get the memo or realized that no one asked them about giving up their land. Mostly the latter. Washington warned St. Clair that a surprise attack was coming, and he was right. By that time, most of St. Clair's men had deserted. The bloodbath that followed killed about a quarter of the American army. Washington later said of St. Clair, "Oh God, he's worse than a murderer." St. Clair's defeat, as it was known, led to the first ever congressional investigation of the executive branch, and despite having his reputation destroyed, he ended up being a territory governor of that very same land. In fact, there's a bunch of places named for him in Pennsylvania and Ohio. None of those places include the word defeat with them. Spoiler alert, in their book The Life and Wars of Gideon J. Pillow, authors Nathaniel C. Hughes Jr. and Roy P. Stonecipher wrote, "Fame chose Gideon Pillow as her darling and laid opportunities at his feet like golden apples, but he kicked them aside." Born in 1806, Pillow was President James K. Polk's law partner, so when the Mexican-American War broke out, Polk naturally made him a brigadier general, a job for which Pillow was completely unfit. After blowing it by digging trenches on the wrong side of the Camargo fortifications, Pillow claimed credit for the victories at Contreras and Churubusco in the press. Not only was he nearly court-martialed for his lies, but he really ticked off General-in-Chief Winfield Scott, and the two men feuded for the rest of their lives. At the start of the Civil War, Pillow became a brigadier general in the Confederate Army and fought at the Battle of Belmont. That time he did okay, and the Confederate Congress thanked him by giving him temporary command of Fort Donelson, which they regretted almost immediately. In 1862, the fort came under attack. Senior officer John B. Floyd ceded command of the fort to Pillow, who then fled, ceding command to Simon Bolivar Buckner, who promptly surrendered. And that's not all. The following year, Pillow was in command of a group of Tennessee volunteers on the last day of the Battle of Stones River, when he was found hiding behind a tree instead of leading the Confederate charge. It sounds like something Pillow would do, but we have to be fair. Some historians dispute this account, for which there is understandably little existing evidence. The bottom line is that Pillow was soft. No pun intended. Fair. The pun was intended. Today, the name Benedict Arnold is a synonym for traitor. Look, if the Bradys are using your name as a put-down, you're a pretty bad guy.
Well then, Miss Benedict Arnold, you'll find out what.
Was Arnold a bad general? Nope, not in the least. Did he almost cost those pesky colonists their freedom? Most certainly. Just for a little bit of how did it get to be a put-down in the first place backstory, he became a successful businessman despite being thin-skinned and quick to criticize others. Arnold threw himself into the American Revolutionary cause. In 1778, George Washington rewarded his service by granting him command of the city of Philadelphia. That's when things started to go wrong. Arnold got on the wrong side of Joseph Reed, president of the Supreme Executive Council of Pennsylvania, who made it his mission to badmouth Arnold. That and some financial issues convinced Arnold to go where he thought he'd be better appreciated and loved.
You know, the British would appreciate you. They would love you.
It worked. Arnold promptly jumped ship, becoming staunchly pro-British, and he did it with a treasonous twist. He resigned his Philadelphia command, playing up a leg injury, and convinced Washington to give him command of West Point, which was crucial to controlling access to the entire Hudson River. Once there, Arnold deliberately began systematically weakening West Point's defenses. He cooked up a scheme and secretly contacted British Major John Andre.
In exchange for £20,000, I shall transfer to you the plans for West Point.
Arnold and Andre put a plan in motion to get a map of the fortress to the British command. Andre was caught and executed. But not only did Arnold manage to escape, the British made him a brigadier general.
Arnold, he's a traitor. It's right here in the letter.
Arnold later wrote to Washington claiming he switched sides for, quote, love of my country. He certainly had an interesting way of showing it.
Benedict Arnold?
Yeah, it's a great part.
Well, it is if you like being a traitor.